Today on the Front Row Podcast, we're going to be reviewing Tenet. We're going to get in pretty deep on characters, cinematography, things we really liked, a couple things we didn't like so much, and do all that spoiler-free because we don't want to ruin the more than likely first experience you have back at a theater. So, yeah, here's the show.
I think Dark Knight was the first movie that Chris Nolan filmed on IMAX.
It might have been
because he's done 5 now.
He didn't do Batman Begins on IMAX.
No, but he did do Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He did Dunkirk.
Mm-hmm.
He did Interstellar. And now
Tenet.
Tenet, dude.
Which we just saw.
Dude, even in a year without COVID and without the theater closures and stuff like that.
Right.
We've been looking forward to seeing Tenet since last fall. It's been almost a year now that we've been waiting for it.
That we've been not even waiting for it, but just seriously talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And giving it the time during our movie discussions where we're actually going into detail about what the hell's going to happen.
Right.
What's this going to be like?
I remember seeing the first trailer for it when it was either when we saw 1917 or when we saw It Chapter 2. But we knew as soon as we saw the trailer, we knew that movie was going to be the blockbuster of the summer.
Oh, yeah.
And because Chris Nolan always takes over the summer. Whenever he has a new film, it's always, it kind of pushes forward it launches the summer blockbusters.
And it's been, I'm pretty sure I don't know how many movies it's been now, but for at least since The Dark Knight, it's been, if there's a Nolan movie coming out, it's going to be in the summer.
Right.
And it's going to be more than likely a blockbuster. Not all of them have achieved, obviously, as well as The Dark Knight has, but that's because The Dark Knight is a DC comic Batman film.
Sure.
So obviously you're going to have way more fandom than original pictures like Interstellar or
also
Dunkirk.
In the same year that that Marvel was kicking off with Iron Man. So
that's true.
The superhero genre at the time had a lot of exposure.
Yeah, it had a lot going for it. It had a lot of interest, at least, because that year was kind of the first year that Iron Man was the first Marvel movie that was kind of like, people were like, why are they doing Iron Man? Like, that's kind of not the character or the superhero that you would want to kick a franchise off with.
Right.
Iron Man's not the first name that comes. It is now.
Well, I guess to be fair, they did start with the Hulk, but I'm not sure that was as successful as they would have hoped for.
Yeah, there have been a couple different Hulks from the TV show to the Ang Lee 2003 absolute mess that was.
Yeah, and who did, was it Edward Norton?
It was an Incredible Hulk.
That was in the Incredible Hulk.
That came out the same year as Iron Man, actually.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, I think they both came out in 2008.
Okay, and they weren't tied together in any way. I don't think they kind of.
There's a post-credit scene where RDJ shows up.
Okay, yeah.
As Tony Stark and talks to whoever the general is or the military guy that's in the Incredible Hulk movie. They have like a meeting.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they talk about putting together a team, but that obviously didn't happen for obviously a little bit after the fact.
Yeah.
But getting back to Tenet, because that is what this video is about.
Yeah.
Kind of like you said, even in a year without COVID, this was probably the most anticipated movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And having it pushed back, I think, just added to that. Even though it was, looking back at it, it was only a month and a half. It was supposed to come out mid-July originally, but it feels like we've been waiting for years for this.
It feels like not only because of COVID that we've been waiting forever for it, but because they pushed it back that barely a month and a half. We've just been waiting. It feels like we've been waiting and waiting, and we got to see it early, which was great.
Yeah,
we got to see it in IMAX, which was even greater. Because there's no Nolan experience like a Nolan IMAX experience.
No, and I think he knows that. He wants every single viewer, if he had his way, would see his movies in IMAX. That's how he designs them. And this one, more than any in the past, he built it for IMAX theaters.
Yeah.
And he was, from the beginning, adamant that it was only going to release in theaters. once all the closures and delays and all of that started happening.
Right.
He wanted it to be released this year and in theaters.
Mm-hmm. He got his wish. Thank God, too, man. I tell you what, I mean, I've watched a couple of movies that were supposed to be released that went to streaming, or movies that were already, kind of more higher anticipated streaming movies that people were waiting for.
Yeah.
And some were good, most weren't, but none of them kind of gave me that fix that I needed, that I knew I would always get in a theater, whether or not it was a good or bad movie.
Right.
Because when you actually get to sit in a theater and experience the full surround sound, the larger than life picture that you can't get anywhere else, it adds something to a movie, whether or not it's good.
Exactly. And seeing it in that IMAX format is an experience in and of itself, even beyond that of a normal theater. And what I actually noticed today, I noticed a lot of the sound, how much more vivid the sound is.
Oh my gosh.
In the IMAX theaters.
Right.
It's kind of built for that.
It is. Right.
But also the way that Christopher Nolan edits his sound in his films, you can't really put words to it. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's very distinct to his style of editing. The way that he balances dialogue and music with background noise and sound effects and all of those things.
It's almost overwhelming how enveloping it is.
Yeah.
Because it makes you kind of almost feel the space. And even though the music in the film is obviously not taking, it's non-diegetic, right? It's not in the space that they're in.
Right.
It's added into the movie. But even a non-natural sound like the score still kind of gives you that kind of it gives you pins and needles sometimes, because when it plays right, you feel like you're closer to being in that actual space.
Yeah, and
that
especially
you actually are.
The way that Hans Zimmer did not do this movie. He did Chris Nolan's last two, I believe. He did do Dunkirk and Interstellar.
Right.
In both of those, and now in this one, even with a new person doing the score, the common theme that I saw too, and it ties into the movie, was time.
Right.
The score is almost, it picks up pace as we are running out of time, so to speak, in the film. It almost acts as a clock or as a metronome going in the background of the film.
And I think certain parts of the score do play in reverse.
Yeah.
It sounded like obviously there are scenes that are inverted, or that play as an inverted scene where people are inverting themselves. And I don't think that's a spoiler, that people are inverting themselves in time. So when people are inverting themselves, the actual music that's playing is also inverting with them.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think that happens at least a couple of times.
And it's interesting. I mean, Christopher Nolan, I think, has become known for the way that his films interact with time, the way that they play on time. He has an obsession with time. He does.
It's very much an obsession.
But also along with that comes an obsession to detail, because he has to be. He wants to be accurate. He brings people in for films like this, or for films like Interstellar, to make sure that he's not making technical mistakes or huge scientific blunders. He wants to be as accurate as possible, given the content.
Right.
But I think this didn't feel old. It didn't feel like something that we had seen before. He played with time in a way that we have never seen him do.
In a way that he hasn't done yet.
Right.
Yeah. And it's weird that he can continue to have this obsession and give us different ways to examine time. From wormholes in Interstellar to time inversion in this, to even all the way back to Memento, where time is just completely non-linear, and that's it. It's as simple as the things you see happening are so non-linear and chopped up that time is just completely out the window.
Yeah, even when he plays time out normally, or as it would make sense to us, like he's doing things like in Dunkirk, where one section of the film is occurring over the course of 30 minutes. Another is occurring over the course of an hour. And you're watching these happen side by side, but also interlaced within each other. He always comes up with something new. It never feels tired.
It never feels tired, and it never feels like he's retreading.
Right, and he's certainly not forcing it. I think these are brand new ideas, and this movie was something I think he was working on for a long time. He had these ideas.
Right.
It was all about how he was going to make it happen, and part of that is all of the different practical effects that he uses. He could not have made this movie without the budget that would allow him to use those practical effects. He doesn't want to make anything up. He doesn't want to be fake in any way or try to he's not trying to trick the audience.
Right. We talked about that a little bit. He treats the audience as if they are smart.
Right.
Where in some cases, obviously, the audience is just going for escape. They don't care about the minute details. But a filmmaker like Chris Nolan, who I think very much respects his audience, even if they're just casual movie watchers, he puts in that time to make sure that they feel as if they're watching something as real as if it unfolded in front of them when they walked out the theater.
Yeah.
Right. There's a dedication to that, and not a lot of filmmakers do that.
And in a way,
very few do that.
In a way, I think that he sees the audience as equals to him. None of what goes into his movies feels gimmicky. It doesn't feel like he's being pretentious with his filmmaking.
Right.
But he's also not going to baby the audience. He's not going to explain to you exactly what happens.
Right.
We all have to figure it out together.
There are a lot of scenes in the movie. That's actually something I wanted to touch on. There are a lot of scenes in the movie actually where things happen and you go, okay, how did they get that to be able to do that? And I think a lot of times Nolan just wants to say, it doesn't matter. They're CIA agents. Of course, they have all this stuff. We don't need to see how they got it or who gave it to them. There's none of those like James Bond moments where they're like walking through a hallway and he's, someone's giving them all this stuff and like, this does this and this does this. A lot of those scenes are just cut. They're just not there. Yeah. The scenes unfold and you go, oh, how did they do that? And you think to yourself, oh, they're that person. They probably got it somewhere. Like we don't need to have all these expository dumps throughout the movie. We just need to know what's happening when it happens. We don't need to take time away from the action itself.
Right. I noticed that too. And I think he does the same thing with sort of the how did this character get from point A to point B? It doesn't matter. He doesn't, and because they're very careful. They shoot everything on location. They don't want to use sound stages and green screens and things like that.
Right.
But he doesn't have to show us a character getting on a plane to fly to India. He just moves on with the story.
He can show the plane or the car, and then that's it.
He picks up where it matters because we don't need to know how a person drove there. We don't need to know how they walked there or whatever.
Right.
The one thing that I kind of did have an issue with was sort of it almost feels cliche at this point, especially for Chris Nolan movies. It was very reminiscent of Inception, kind of the walking dialogue.
Yeah,
very
the walking
expository, very just kind of one character explaining to another what's going on
as they're walking around a very beautiful scene or location.
And I didn't mind it. In Interstellar, it almost felt necessary because there was just a lot to unpack.
There's just so much.
I'm sorry, in Inception, there was a lot. There was a lot to unpack with that.
It happens in Interstellar too.
It does.
Yeah.
But I think this time it wouldn't have bothered me with maybe once or twice. It was kind of recurring. At a point, towards the end of the movie, I thought it was actually getting a little bit old having to listen to those kinds of conversations between characters because they're not always necessary. A couple times, sure, especially if he's trying to just get the audience caught up to speed. But I didn't think he needed to do that throughout the entirety of the film. Anytime there was a scene change or location change,
or at least if you are going to do that, mix it up a little. Just make them not walking and talking the whole time.
Yeah.
Give it a little variety, which does happen. I mean, obviously, Michael Caine's role in this movie is very much a sit-down conversation.
Right.
It gives you that similar expository detail that you need. But something I've always appreciated about Nolan, and I know people like to bag on the walking and talking thing, it's never an uninteresting shot. I'm always interested in what's going on around them, at least. Or even when they're sitting and talking, the way each frame is set up, or the way the camera moves or doesn't move, the way it pushes in or pulls out on characters or on objects, is always compelling enough to me to where if I am sitting there and going, okay, this expository dump is getting a little old, or this is the third time we've had one of these, I need something else to happen. It doesn't get me to the point where I'm feeling like, let's go, let's move on, because I'm still compelled by what's on screen.
Yeah, it's always dynamic, whether it's the background or the characters, what they're doing themselves. Yeah, it doesn't, as much as you might get tired of the dialogue, you're right. He's careful about what shots he places those in.
Right.
And I think also where he places them throughout the story. They never feel like they're interrupting something more important for that conversation. Right. It's not getting in the way at all.
Right. Something I think that was also really important about this movie was casting. And I think it was pretty much nailed.
Yeah.
In terms of our main protagonist, obviously John David Washington, who, as the days go by, is so much becoming the spitting image of his father.
Yeah.
It's almost ridiculous. But not in a bad way, though, because here's the thing. For me, Denzel Washington's one of the best actors ever. I love Denzel Washington. Right. He's been in some of my favorite movies of all time. And he has it. Like kind of what we talked about at the end of the movie when we were first walking out and coming home, we talked about how John David had it. We don't really know you can't really put boxes around it though.
Yeah,
it's just something you see when you see that actor do something on camera, and Denzel's a perfect example of having it.
Yeah,
in every movie he is in.
And not only that, I think that John David Washington is quickly approaching the status that his dad has, in the sense that there are plenty of times I have watched a Denzel movie just because he was in it. And I think John David Washington is going to start gaining that sort of following, gaining that sort of popularity. First of all, that audiences love, but also that directors love, that production companies love.
Oh yeah.
He has put out in his short career as an actor an excellent body of work.
Yeah.
And he hasn't disappointed yet.
No, not yet. It's been a short career, so obviously there's time to fail. There's room for failure. But the fact that he's been in the 2 movies he's been in now, and he's performed at the level he has, with the charisma and just even the likability. Like, he doesn't have a name in this movie. And when you watch the credits roll, it just says protagonist, John David Washington.
Yeah,
that's all it says. Even without a name, he just has that kind of likability. Like I wanted to see what happened to him. I wanted to see if he could do and I'm trying to avoid spoilers. I wanted to see if he could do what he was trying to do the entire movie. I was never not compelled by what he was trying to do.
Towards the end of the movie, I thought about that because I think it'd be easy to look at this film and say that they didn't spend enough time on creating characters that we cared about. They didn't spend enough time on background and things like that.
Right.
And towards the beginning, I would have agreed, but we find ourselves towards the end of the movie, and it's a, without giving anything away, it's a very emotional ending, and one I found myself caring deeply about what happened to each one of those characters.
Yeah.
I didn't have to know their background. I didn't have to know how they got there, or who they were doing it for, or anything like that. I cared by the end of it because of the way that they're just so likable and they're just so good at their roles.
Right.
That if you can tell that they care, it makes you care as well.
I think with a second viewing, Robert Pattinson's performance I think a lot of the moments where he's not speaking, where he's reacting to something that we can't see, is going to play a much bigger role on how we feel about his character once we get closer to the end. Because I think with what happens at the end, it's stuff that you're not trying to see when you watch the movie for the first time.
Right.
Because with the revelations that happen, you're surprised. Obviously, you're shocked. You're put in a place where you go, I didn't see that coming. So obviously, upon second viewing, you'll see it coming. But I think his performance, the idiosyncrasies in his reactions to certain things, or in the way he converses with certain people, I think that'll add a certain level of depth, at least to his character, that we might not have seen, with that first watch, because we didn't necessarily know we were trying to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can tell that they care enough about the details, from the actors to post-production and editing, that you're going to have things like that you notice throughout the film, where now on a second watch you'll see, oh, that ties into the ending, or that directly leads to this scene, things that you might have missed if you're not looking for it. But we know that they care enough that they're going to make sure that it's continuous. They're going to make sure that the story makes sense from start to finish, even if watching in real time, you don't really know what's happening.
Right. And I think there was a little bit of purpose to not giving people like John David Washington's character doesn't have too much background, but characters like Elizabeth Debicki, her character does have a lot of background and motivation to do certain things or say certain things, as does Kenneth Branagh. I don't know how to say his name.
I think you're getting it.
The main antagonist.
Yeah.
There's a little more development there. But with someone like John David Washington, I think there was a point with that, because a lot of the point of the film itself isn't about the past. It's about how the future can influence the past and change the course of what's going on in the present. So I think there's a little bit of deliberate meaning to that.
Yeah, and I think it works well, because it never feels like just monotonous character building that you might get in other films.
Well, and it also works well because John David Washington is so compelling, because as he is on screen, he's interesting. You don't have to know about him, and I think the mystery kind of adds to that.